In this episode of Positive Takes, I wanted to talk about Christopher Nolan's film The Prestige. So I'm not sure exactly how this film is considered now, but it certainly feels a little bit underappreciated or maybe underrated. And I actually think it's probably one of Nolan's best films. This is the one he made, I think, in sort of between Batman Begins and The Dark Knight. And it has, Christian Bale again, so he likes to work with his little company of actors. So several things about this film. I think it really encapsulates a lot of the themes and issues that Nolan's really fascinated by. Obsession itself, rivalry, deception or putting on performances, or all these sort of allegories for the creative process, as well as filmmaking specifically. A lot of the things that apply to stage magician acts also apply to how films are made, right from the beginning, where they actually had magicians who were giving tips to filmmakers about how to do different tricks and different visual effects at the time. So I think it's really interesting about this movie is it stars two actors who at the time, they had a certain level of prestige, but they weren't really at the level they are now. So it has Hugh Jackman and Christian Bale, who I think were probably around their 30s at that point, and both honestly have sort of a musical background, really. You look at the Newsies, and then Hugh Jackman's been in all sorts of things. So they have that sort of talent for theatricality, for putting on a show, and for all that stuff. I will say it is a little odd to me that in the poster for this movie, they, put Scarlett Johansson front and center, so they make it seem as if she'll be, the real linchpin of this movie, or maybe even, the narrative voice, or, somehow be, kind of the third wheel. I don't think that's really the case. Hugh Jackman becomes kind of obsessed with getting revenge on Christian Bale very early, due to the death of his wife in the middle of one of their acts. And then Scarlett Johansson sort of becomes this other, understudy, sort of apprentice person or assistant. First, she is with Hugh Jackman in both a sort of, professional way and also romantic involved. And then she sort of transitions over to Christian Bale. And, spoilers, obviously, don't watch this if you haven't seen the movie, and it's, it's not that well done, which I'll talk about later. But Christian Bale turns out to have a twin, which he sort of switches places with interchangeably. And this is the reason why he can't remember what rope knot he used to tie up the wife in the act that killed, Hugh Jackman's wife, because they probably switched at some point, or for whatever reason, one of them did the knot and the other one, sort of finished the trick. So anyway, Scarlett Johansson becomes involved with him later on, but the way they do the effects and stuff, they have Christian Bale playing his own twin, obviously, but they also have him, putting on this heavy makeup and playing this other sort of third character, Cutter, I think. And that's where it doesn't really work, because you can see from the very start of the movie that it's obviously Christian Bale wearing a fake nose and facial hair, but it's unmistakably him. And then they also have Hugh Jackman playing an actor that he finds, or I think Michael Caine's character finds, and then looks very similar to that character. So, it's a little odd when you have sort of this movie about doubling, and you have the actors literally playing other characters that aren't supposed to be them. And also makes me think of Black Swan or something, that's sort of the thing they're going for there. But I just think if it's their first time watching it, for sure you won't be fooled for a second. You'd be like, oh, why does Christian Bale have a twin or something? Or you'd be like, it's a little weird that Hugh Jackman's playing his own twin. You can also look at something like The Great, which is airing on Hulu presently, where they have Nicholas Hoult play his Peter the Great character, or Peter Great's son, I'm not sure, and then also portray the double, Pugachev. So I think in that one it works a lot better. Or you can look at all these movies about dissociative identity disorder, like Split, where you see an actor who does a much more convincing job of not really playing themselves. Anyway, so Hugh Jackman and Christian Bale try their best, and I think Christian Bale actually does a really good job of being these are two distinct people, two distinct personalities who inhabit these different roles. One of the Christian Bales has a wife, and I think a child, a daughter, and the other one, is starting this romantic relationship with Scarlett Johansson. So he has to kind of implicate himself in these things. And it is very strange. Wouldn't he just tell his wife and the daughter, and sorry, not the daughter, well, also the daughter, but the other character that's involved? Wouldn't they just tell them straight up what the deal is instead of keeping this big secret? But basically, there's a central theme about how if you want to be a really successful magician, you have to be able to really commit. And they sort of prove this in the case of Christian Bale, because they have basically Hugh Jackman sets up a loaded gun so that Christian Bale loses one of his fingers as his first act of revenge, and then the twin has to match that wound. So they show a scene where they're sitting together, and he has like a chisel to his finger and a hammer, ready to cut off his finger. So that's his commitment. And then Hugh Jackman's commitment is very much what the rest of the film is about. I will say, Hugh Jackman was already a very strong actor even at this point. He had done The Fountain either before or after this, I'm not sure, but, really close to it, and he has a lot of those same qualities, that, like, haunted emotionality, again, the obsession, the drive, the anger, the sadness. It's all right there. His character, I won't say he's not as well defined, but I will say, like, he is very, like, single-minded. Like, you start out the film being like, oh, he's trying to get revenge for the death of his wife, but at a certain point you're like, obviously this is going far past that, that's not really a good enough excuse anymore. Like, he's just doing it because he wants to do it. And just to talk about the end of the movie, let's just jump there. So basically, he goes off to find Nikola Tesla, following this fake rabbit trail. And this whole movie is based on a book that's a sort of epistolary novel, so it's a bunch of letters back and forth to each other. So that's why they keep exchanging, notebooks and diaries and stuff about how, what happened in the past and all that stuff. But basically, Christian Bale sets him up by being like, oh yeah, the way I do this new trick that you're becoming obsessed with, the Vanishing Man, is I use this machine that my friend Nikola Tesla made for me. And actually, that turns out to be a lie. So Hugh Jackman goes off, thinking this is the real secret, and he accidentally, provokes Tesla to make this cloning machine, essentially. So it's this, like, hard sci-fi, or maybe soft sci-fi, I don't know, explanation for how he's going to do a trick. Basically, there's two cupboards, two wardrobes, or closets, and one person either throws a ball or just steps into and then appears on the other side. And this is, it's based on sort of a classic trick, but usually they do it with doubles. Michael Caine even suggested Jackman early in the movie, and that's probably how Christian Bale's doing it, to get that perfect illusion, but it turns out to be the twin, so he was right all along. Meanwhile, Jackman thinks there must be some other thing behind this, so Tesla basically makes him a machine, and his assistant's played by Andy Serkis, which I think is nice, but he doesn't really play a big role. And anyway, he makes this machine that's able to transport matter. At first, Jackman thinks it doesn't work, but then he, through using rabbits and hats, he realizes it is working, but they're actually moving the location of the object, way off. So he devises a new trick, which is kind of the basis of the last part of the movie. So anyway, I was saying about Scarlett Johansson, I just think she doesn't play a significant enough role in the movie, and that's not like a slam on her. I'm basically saying that that Chris Nolan didn't write like a good enough part for her for this time. So she should have been like much more developed. Or maybe she's supposed to be like that secret underlying thing that you're supposed to think about, but it just doesn't quite work for me. And then, Hugh Jackman's wife character doesn't really have a big impact either, nor does Christian Bale's wife, who ends up hanging herself because of all the stress and all that stuff. I will say that is like a very, resonant thematic element that does work very well, to be like, this is where your obsession leads to all these horrible things happening. So anyway, the film is basically about both how Christian Bale is sort of hobbling his own life because he can only live half a life that he's sort of like switching in and out of as the two twins. And then we have Hugh Jackman, who's basically driving himself insane. And then as soon as he starts testing out the machine, he's basically starting to clone or transport himself to this other machine pad. And the first time that he does it, which they show way later in the movie than when you learn about this, they basically have a gun set up in case something goes wrong, somehow somebody gets horribly mutilated in the process. But it actually has the clone shoot the original Hugh Jackman. And kind of a big question of the movie is, does that even matter? It's basically the Star Trek transporter problem. If you have an original and you have a copy, and it's basically the exact same atomic structure and memories and all that, then which is real and which is fake? It's also, the ship of Theseus problem, that whole thing. Like, if you replace every part, is it still the same thing? Obviously, Jackman, by impulse, has started the cycle where he decides, the one who gets transported is the real one. And just to talk about the book briefly, I sort of read the synopsis. That one actually takes it a bit further, where there's just a blank that's left, and the copy gets the memory and the, I guess, consciousness and all that. But that one has a very strange framing story that's set in the present, involving, at some point, the machine malfunctions, so there's a clone that has no body, almost like a ghost or a spirit, that I think is part of the narrative at some point. They all have various kids who are continuing the feud. The cloning machine keeps getting used and abused and having all these descendants or fake descendants. I don't know. It's just like a lot of complication where the original premise is so clean and so good, which is why, obviously Chris Nolan just decided to focus on that part and sort of have the reveal be very different. So the reveal that's supposed to be very shocking, you basically have Hugh Jackman implying and intimidating that he's only used the machine a few times, first to just test it and then to like show it to this Magic Act proprietor to get him to buy into it, and then he does perform the trick another time to an amazed audience. So that's supposed to be the end of it, and then I guess he does keep doing the Magic Act even though he claims he's not going to. But then you find out at the very end of the film, and this is when Michael Caine's little monologue about what the Prestige is, where he describes the 3 acts of a Magic Act and how it kind of works to fool the audience, subverting expectations. That's when you have the reveal that Hugh Jackman's actually been cloning himself over and over and over again, and the clone always dies in these tanks, so he just has like this whole like kind of mausoleum of a bunch of like 20 or so times he's done the trick. I think there's also the implication in the movie, and certainly in the book, that he's kind of degrading his soul, think of Voldemort or something, kind of like each copy is significantly less humane and less human, and this is sort of, obviously not a good thing. The way the film is shot is Chris Nolan obviously tends to use this like very realistic style. He likes to shoot in camera effects whenever possible. He has the whole thing with the Tesla coil where there's like electricity sparking all around that looks really cool. Presumably was safe to film, not faked by CGI or something. He does a bunch of magic tricks that he presumably either had the actors learn or like had a magician on set to kind of step in, or I don't really know. But basically, it's a lot about like, I guess, kind of nerding out about like turn of the century Victorian era magic. The fashions are great. Both the actors again are super excellent, as are the secondary and tertiary actors. We have David Bowie doing a rare performance as Nikolai Tesla, and he actually does a great job. Like you really believe it. There's this other recurring phrase that he keeps saying. That's like man's reach often exceeds his grasp. But he alters it slightly. That's like exceeds his, I think, will or willingness, basically. So it's basically saying that maybe humans can do like almost unlimited things if they really try, but they should probably not do that or should probably stop themselves. And this is obviously very relevant to his latest film, Oppenheimer, of when this video comes out. So I really think these films kind of go nicely together. As well as the rest of his filmography, almost every one of his films has something about obsession, whether it's about being a vigilante or being an astronaut that does this dangerous mission, or, convincing yourself you're either in a dream or not in a dream. He just has these very, like, resonant themes, and the whole, like, crew that he works with, and the practical effects that he, like, replicates again and again, and the, leading actors that he works with. Michael Caine, comes back again and again. He obviously loves him. I think this movie is definitely worth your time. I think there was a sort of a movie in between, Memento and his later career, the one with Al Pacino kind of going crazy in Alaska. I feel like that one's kind of his weakest one. I'm not a big fan of that one. Again, it has good performances, and it's very like noirish and dark and cryptic. But at the end of the day, I don't think it has any of these like themes that kind of transcend. That one's like a remake, which I think is the only time that Chris Nolan has done something like that, aside from his work on Westworld. I think this is a very strong entry. It does have those noir elements anyway. It has a very strong epistolary framing device where they're kind of like going back and forth. It's also kind of funny how little often they actually intersect in the movie. So it's a lot of them like being mad at each other from afar. And then you have these like very nice reveals. Again, obviously the things with the doubles kind of ruins that a little bit, but I think it is also trying to be funny, maybe. Obviously we have the drunk version of Hugh Jackman, which is very comical. And then at some point Scarlett Johansson just like exits the picture. They're like, you can just have each other, basically is what she's like, and she just leaves. So it is a little strange, again. I don't know what the difference is with the novel for that character. But it's basically just about these two guys. And I think, at least for me, the very last bit, I think Christopher Nolan's really great at these like mic drop moments, whether it's the Joker card or like the spinning top in Inception, or I won't say what happens at the end of Oppenheimer, but that one's amazing as well. I don't think it quite works in this one. Again, I don't think the reveal is as I don't know. It's not as resonant as I think he wants it to be. But basically, it's just again Michael Caine saying that monologue and saying the prestige again over the tanks. And I don't know, maybe there's some layer that I'm really missing about it, but for me at least, I'm just like, okay, we already knew that. That's not like a big reveal. Maybe it's just like supposed to be haunting and like creepy. And it is. It's that sort of Victorian sci-fi that I don't see a lot, and definitely not this successful. There was also the very strange thing about when this released. This and The Illusionist came out at the same time. They're almost like competing each other. Now it's kind of funny because neither movie really has anything to do with the other. And that one's quite fun also, but it's very much like more of a thriller, or like almost like a thriller is the perfect word, but it's just like light, and it's not meant to be taken very seriously. This one is obviously dark and heavy and meant to be like about how deep and dark the human psyche goes. So one is still worth checking out. Basically, all of Nolan's films are in 4K, and they look really good in that format, especially with like HDR. He likes, lots of heavy contrasts. Everything about how it's shot and edited and the sound design, still hold up. I know there's been lots of problems with that recently, people not being able to hear his movies. No such problem here. Very good soundtrack. Definitely worth checking out. All right, for this episode of Positive Takes, this is The Prestige. It's a great movie, really. It's probably one of his top films. Definitely in the top 5.